So how many of you are familiar with the story of the elves and the shoemaker? Do you know that story by the Brothers Grimm? And if you don't know the story, just a little synopsis. It's about a shoemaker who falls on very, very hard times, on the brink of complete destruction. He has no money, no food, no nothing for him and his wife. And he has just enough money to buy leather for one more pair of shoes. And so he gets that leather and he cuts it out. And in exhaustion and despair, he leaves it on his workbench and goes to sleep, goes to bed. And he wakes up in the morning and there's a beautiful, exquisite, completed pair of shoes sitting there. And he sells those shoes at just a huge price in comparison to normal, just enough to go buy two more sets of leather. And so he does that again, and the pattern repeats itself over and over again until he starts to be pretty prosperous. And so he and his wife decide to hide out and figure out who it is that's making these beautiful shoes. And so they hide themselves, and in the middle of the night, two elves come in, and very expertly, they create these shoes and sew these shoes. But the shoemaker and his wife notice that the elves are also in poverty. They're completely naked and don't even have shoes of their very own. And so, since they have been so blessed by these elves, the shoemaker and his wife decide to bless the elves, and so they make them clothing and shoes, leave it for the elves. The elves find it the next night. They're so excited. They dance with joy. And the story ends, and the elves are gone, and they're happy, but now the shoemaker is prosperous because of their help. What a great story, isn't it? Wouldn't it be great if we had elves in the world or fairies in the world that would do all the things that we need? And I can tell you, my family believes in those fairies and elves. I just, as a matter of fact, yesterday afternoon noticed this, that we as a family seem to believe that if you put dishes in the sink, somebody will magically put those in the dishwasher or wash them. Or if the trash is climbing up the wall, somebody will magically come in the middle. There's a fairy, a trash fairy, or a cleaning fairy. The one they really believe in is the litter box fairy, because nobody's doing the dirty job. And you know, we believe that in the church, don't we? I wonder who sets this communion and washes those dishes every week. I wonder who lights the candle and makes sure that it has oil in it. Who magically changes out that sign? Well, I don't know. I can tell you there are fairies. I believe in fairies. But they have real names. Like at my house, their names are Mom and Dad. And at our church, it's names like Tina and John and Doreen and Fred and Claire and Robbie. There's some names that you guys know. But there are magical fairies. The problem is that there's a breakdown in the system, because those fairies oftentimes do all the work and all the work and all the work. And they do it selflessly, just like our veterans. We forget to thank them, and we forget to serve them. And Jesus had something to say about that. My friends, we've been talking about what it means to keep your promises when you join the church or when you're a part of a church, just like when you're part of a marriage and you make vows, or you're a Girl Scout and you do the promise. There are promises that we make in the church, and we've been talking about it, that we promise to support the ministry of the church, not to support the organization of the church, to support the ministry of the church through our prayers, our presence, our gifts, our service, and our witness. And so we've come to the end of that, and we're going to talk today about service and witness, and there's a reason we're not going to separate those two. One causes the other, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But let's talk about, Jesus had a lot to say about service. And one story in particular that we know where Jesus was very direct about service, not only in his example and what he said. We're going to read from John 13, a familiar passage, but we're going to read it today and look at it one more time. Hopefully you'll have a different perspective today. We're going to look at John 13, and we're going to read verses 1 through 17, and then we're going to skip ahead and read verses 34 through 35. This is Jesus. He's coming to the end of his ministry. He's having the last Passover meal with his disciples, and this is what happens. Chapter 13, verse 1. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I've done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher, Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." He goes on to kind of reveal who's going to betray him in Judas, and then he gets to the end of the meal, and we're going to pick up in verse 34. He kind of finishes the discussion with this. "A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Let's pray. Well, holy God, we ask that you would quiet the voices in our minds and in our hearts. Let us hear from you and only from you. Teach us what you want us to know, and then help us to respond with boldness. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I want us to make sure we understand the situation, the magnitude of this situation, and how extraordinary Jesus' action was. First of all, we're told some things very important in this story. We're told that there's some different characters here. Obviously, there is Jesus, and we know who Jesus is, the Word in the flesh. He is the very presence and power of God. But in that story also, we're told that there is Judas, and that Jesus already knows what Judas is going to do. He knows that Judas is going to betray him. There is also Peter, and we find out through the rest of the story that he also knows that Peter is going to deny him 3 times. Peter's going to be asked, "Weren't you one of his disciples? Weren't you with him?" "Oh, no, I wasn't. It wasn't me." So you've got the betrayer and the denier, and then the disciples are there. And we also know, and Jesus knows ahead of time, that these very disciples who were following him are going to run away when stuff gets scary and ugly, that they are going to abandon him. So you have the denier, the betrayer, and the abandoners, or the cowards. And they're all there with Jesus, and Jesus knows exactly what's going to happen. And then we're also told in that Jesus knows that all authority and all power over everything was given to him. Now, just for a moment, human beings, let's put ourselves in Jesus' place. You're hanging out with your friends, and you know one is going to betray you, one is going to deny you, the rest are going to abandon you, and you have all the power. What are you going to do? I can tell you what would happen in any of the television and movies that we watch right now. Right? We would annihilate them before they had a chance to do those bad things to us, right? That's the world we live in. But Jesus did something extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. Jesus took off his cloak, his outer garment, which is a very significant, symbolic gesture, my friends. Don't miss the significance of that. In those days, your outer garment was your protection. First of all, it told the world who you were and what your status was. The color of your robe, especially if it was purple or a bright color, said that you were either a person of power or great wealth. We don't know what color Jesus's was. It doesn't matter because he had all the authority. But that was also your way of staying warm and protecting yourself from the elements, from the heat during the day and the cold at night. And so to give up your outer garment was a huge deal. But so Jesus took off his outer garment and stripped down to just a towel. Person with all the garments, wealth, power, authority. Person with nothing, a servant. Not even shoes, completely stripped down to the bare minimum, was a servant. That is such a symbolic gesture. Paul tells us in Philippians 2 that Jesus, who by the very nature was God, and we know this, the Word in the flesh, took off his godness and made of himself nothing. For Jesus to take off his cloak and put on the clothing and the persona and the garb of a servant was him making himself nothing. He was showing us what he was doing by even becoming a human being, and then what he was going to be doing by going to the cross. That's a powerful gesture. But not only, and so we can learn from that as we try to perfect our serve, because Jesus says, go and serve and do as I have done. If we want to perfect our serve, we can learn from Jesus. And so the first thing I want to offer to us is to clothe ourselves in humility. And that's what Jesus was doing by taking off that robe. See, to become a servant in those days, think about it, people walked around in sandals all day long, and they didn't have streets. They had, dirt and gravel and whatever, and all the animals, and your feet got really nasty. And you also ate sitting down, kind of in a reclining position around these low tables. And so your feet were right there. And so when people came into the household, one of the gestures of hospitality was to have a servant or the lowest, youngest child in the family, if you weren't wealthy enough to have servants. But it was what the minion of the minion was going to be the one that would do that nasty job of washing your feet. That was a show of hospitality and welcome. And so Jesus, when nobody else was going to do that, Jesus chose to be the one to clothe himself in humility and to take the lowest job. Have you ever seen that show, Dirty Jobs? Mike Rowe? Dirty Jobs. Originally where it's all the dirty, disgusting jobs that none of us would ever want, even to the point where he's like getting sick while he's doing some of these jobs. It's so gross. Do you know the original name of that show was Somebody's Gotta Do It? Nothing was beneath Jesus. Nothing. Somebody's got to go and take care of those people. I'm going to come down there. Somebody's got to take off their godness and put on the cloak of a servant. Somebody's got to clean those feet. Nothing's too dirty for Jesus. So let's learn as we perfect our serve, let's clothe ourselves in humility, which is difficult for us to do. But Jesus also shows us how to do that. We're told in this passage that Jesus knew about his relationship with the Father. He knew that he had the love of the Father. He knew where he was going to go. See, here's the thing, my friends. He got his whole identity in his relationship with the Father. And that's why when Jesus says all the commands come down to this, and he gives us a couple commands, and the very first one is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, body, and mind. Make sure that vertical relationship is number one and that you get your identity from that vertical relationship. Because here's the thing. No matter how the world feels about you, God loved the world so much that he sent his only son. God loves you that much. God pursues you that relentlessly. And so you don't have to prove yourself to the rest of the world. Jesus didn't have to prove himself. I don't have to keep my cloak on because God has already declared me loved and redeemed. My friends, you can clothe yourself in humility when you have your identity in your relationship with God. Not only that, Jesus knew where he was going. I don't need the world to provide for me. I don't need affirmation from the world because I know my future's guaranteed. I'm going back home with my God and my Father. My friends, we have that same future. Because Jesus go to the cross for us. We have that same future. Our future is guaranteed. We've talked about this. Nothing can separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ. So clothe yourself in humility. Make sure that vertical relationship works. Get your identity from that. That's why when we talked about it a couple weeks ago, presence is so important. Show up because that's how you come to go and get that identity. When you show up, it reminds you who you belong to. Humility is easy when the vertical relationship works. And then he washed their feet. Because of that, because he had that identity, then he was able to wash their feet. And here's the thing, that's where that second commandment comes in. Love God first, get your identity from that, and then naturally, then go love God's people. See, once that vertical relationship works, you can't help but spread out horizontally, because the love of God poured in you makes you and me want to please God, which says, take care of people. And that's what Jesus tells us. If you go into chapter 14, the very next chapter, Jesus over and over again says, I do what I do because God, my Father, has told me. I don't do any of it on my own. I'm doing it to please the Father and empowered by the Father and under the instruction of the Father. See, I have my identity from the Father, and so naturally I have to do for the Father's people. Get vertical and then get horizontal and serve the people. And that's radical. Serve radically. Jesus washed Judas's feet. Jesus washed Peter's feet. All of us in our lives, my friends, have enemies. All of us in our lives have people who have betrayed us and denied us when we need them or abandoned us for whatever reason at different times. We all have reason to be angry and to say, I'm not serving you. But Jesus told us, do it radically. Serve those people too. Serve those people first. And if you pay attention to Peter in this, my friends. Peter says to Jesus, oh no, you're not washing my feet. And that seems like humility, doesn't it, on the surface? Like, oh, I'm not going to ask you to humble your, to be my servant and wash my feet. But that's really, I think, pride. I don't really need you to wash me. You're okay. I just want to raise you up, and I want to build myself up by raising you up publicly. Jesus says, if I don't wash you, you have no part in me. That's important, my friends. That's the ultimate putting humility on yourself. Because if you don't recognize how much you need grace, if you and I don't recognize how much we need Jesus, how in the world can we receive it? How can we be clean? And he says, if I don't clean you, you have no part with me. So if we're not willing to say, I need Jesus as much as the world around us, we can't receive it. But once we receive it, we're clean. And then we can go and be empowered to do radical things like Jesus did and like Jesus demonstrated. Why is it so important for us to serve like Jesus? Why did he tell us that? And this takes us to the very last part. That is, my friends, our witness to the world. See, to witness something means to see it, to know it, to experience it. And then to become a witness about that thing means to go out and tell others about what you saw and you experienced. Jesus came, we are told, to represent and to demonstrate to us the love of God. We've talked about that so much, my friends, that Jesus came so that the world would know how much God loves us, so that people would know the character and the nature of God himself and God's love. Jesus demonstrated perfect love. Because he is the living personification, God in the flesh, of the author of love itself. And in demonstrating perfect love, he did that through perfect service. Giving himself completely, taking on humility, loving radically, loving others as himself, loving God first and foremost. That's what it means to be perfect in love. It's perfect service. So and he did that so that we would understand who God is. And then when he tells us to go and love as he is loved, I give you one command. Love one another as I have loved you. By this, people will know that you belong to me. My friends, see, when we go out into the world and we serve as Jesus served, and we live like Jesus lived, that's how people will come to know the nature of Jesus. Our witness is not what we say. Our witness is how we live and what we do. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, all the people will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. I heard a great story about a man named Doug, who was a missionary, and he was in India. He was in India, a missionary to India, and he came down with tuberculosis. And so he ended up in the hospital for a very long time. And so he just decided, I'm going to continue evangelizing in this hospital. I'm going to witness to Jesus Christ in this hospital. So he started reading people the Bible and praying for people and trying to hand out tracts and telling them about Jesus. And everybody just ignored him or laughed at him. And he got so discouraged. And one night in the middle of the night, he heard a noise and he woke up. And the man that was in the bed next to him, he was on a ward. And the man that was in the bed next to him, a very elderly man who really couldn't move very well, was trying to get out of the bed to go to the bathroom, and he just couldn't get out. He didn't have the strength to get himself out of bed. So in the middle of the night, he soiled himself in the bed. And all the other patients laughed at him and teased him, and the nurses and the caregivers were actually abusive to him the next day because of it. And so Doug, the following night, waited. And when he heard this man try to get out of bed again, Doug got up and he lifted the man, carried him to the bathroom, and held the man so that he could take care of his business. Brought him back and put him to bed. He did that every night. Little by little, people started listening to him. Little by little, people wanted to know about Jesus. Why? Because when they saw Doug, they saw Jesus. I used to work for Doreen. When I tried to get out of the ministry once, I went to work for, God didn't let me, right? So I went to work for Doreen, and in her office, she has, in the little break room, she has a sign on the wall, or at least she used to have a sign on the wall, that people won't often remember what you say, but they will always remember how you made them feel. Our witness is living out and loving one another the way that Jesus loved us. John Wesley said, "Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can." Andy Stanley put it a lot simpler. If you see a need, meet it. If something needs to be done, do it. You be the elves. You be the elves. We have one job as Christians and followers of Jesus. Go and make disciples. Go and love people according to Jesus' example. And that's how they will come to know Jesus. My friends, how do we change the world? How do we live out what it means to be a Christian? Pray. Keep our promises. Pray. Show up here, show up out there. Share our giftedness radically and with generosity. It doesn't belong to us in the first place. And more than anything, serve the world. When you see a need, meet it. If something needs to be done, do it. And they will see Jesus, and they will know Jesus. That is our witness. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.